Hey, Ken.
Well, hey, Chris. Yes, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you. It's been a while.
And I appreciate your doing this in your evening over there in Europe.
Well, I think I am the one that should be grateful because that means that you had to get up super early because we are on exactly the opposite sides of the planet.
We are. I said that if it was the circumplex, we're at the antipodes here.
Yeah, I don't know
I don't think
which.
our personalities are opposite, but our
I don't think
time
they're
zones are.
opposite. Yeah, they might be different, but probably not opposite. Okay, let me start early. If you had to have a pet, would it be a cat, a dog, a different species, or none at all?
Um, well, at this point in my life, I don't have any more pets, just for the flexibility. Um, but I did until recently have cats, and
Okay.
which would always help kind of humanize, Zoom meetings because, you then have like a tail make its way across the
Uh,
screen. Um, yeah, but yeah, too lazy to have dogs.
They are a pain, especially when you have to like travel or you have to come home all the time. I sort of like being home, so I like having a dog because it's an excuse to like miss meetings. Like I have to walk the dog. Sorry, I can't make it to the faculty meeting.
I hadn't thought
Uh,
about that. Clever.
yeah. See, we're already starting to come into some personality differences. I'm a dog person, you're a cat person. I'm probably less conscientious than you. I'm willing to skip a faculty meeting here and there.
Now, I didn't say I wasn't, I mean, because that's getting pretty, on sort of shaky ground. I wouldn't say I'm not a dog person. I
Oh yeah,
love
okay.
other people's dogs. But then, I'll say, oh, by the way, your dog just took a poop there. You can clean it up. Yeah.
Yeah, cats are a lot simpler. They're independent. They always go to the bathroom in the same place. They generally don't need walks. You can go away for a week and they'll be fine. Yeah, there are advantages to cats. That's no question. Yeah. So Moscow to Hawaii. That's a
Well,
big move, eh?
after 3 decades, in northern Idaho, it seemed like it was time for a change for a variety of reasons. This was mainly at the impetus of my wife, who's a little older. She was like, I'm done working, and you know, I don't want to wait around for you to finish up all your projects. So figure out a way to, relocate.
I mean, you look like you're in Hawaii. You've got the shirt,
Yeah,
you've got the
yeah,
background.
yeah. If well, I'd have to really angle the camera in, but there are palm trees out that way.
Nice. Sweet. So how was that? I mean, you just moved there, right? So how'd that go?
Oh, I mean, I wish for those who, kind of don't want to hear this sort of thing, I'm sorry, but it's actually really lovely.
Oh, well, I mean, it's Hawaii.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a different lifestyle, but there's all sorts of unique cultural features of Hawaii that require getting used to.
Yeah.
But Yeah, but it's been really fascinating, and I certainly, we're just diving into new activities. I think, part of it was the result of aging, the sorts of things we did that really kept us, up in northern Idaho, like mountain biking and so forth. We're getting too old to get thrown off the bike onto rocky trails, and
Right.
so yeah. So now we're, doing paddling and
It's sweet. Yeah, my partner's German, and she lived in California when we met, and we lived there together for 5 or 6 or 7, I don't remember how many years. And if you're German, Hawaii is like so far away because it's literally on the other side of the world. And so she always thought that I'm in California now. It's like a relatively short flight. And it was like, I will go, and then okay, eventually we'll go. And then we had a kid, and then we had COVID, and then we got a job, and then we moved back to Europe. And so I think this is like, I don't think she has many regrets in life, but this is one of her big ones because from here, it's more like, I don't know, somewhere in the Mediterranean, maybe Mauritius or Seychelles or something. Hawaii is a haul.
yeah, that's
I'm not
uh,
sure we're going to make Maui.
if you ever do, right, look us up. But yeah, obviously there's many wonderful places all near, within much closer distance to Switzerland.
So how are you thinking about this transition? So I mean, you mentioned that you still got projects and stuff in Idaho. Um, I think you might have froze for a second. I gotcha. Hmm. Oh, so sorry, Ken. I think that might have been my fault.
Yeah, you just froze up. It was just when we were talking about the distance, and I was thinking, oh, well, maybe this is what happens when you're halfway around the world.
No, my
Um,
VPN seems to have cut out. I'm really sorry. I don't know what that's about. Anyway, I'll try to find a way to stitch these things together, hopefully into a single video, but it looks as if we're still recording. So we'll just go forward. Technical glitch, be what it is. Yeah, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, you just moved, but you also mentioned that your partner really was like the main impetus. So I'm sure you don't mind having to move to Maui, but you've still got stuff going on in Idaho. I guess there's maybe a little teaching, but also research. Like, how are you thinking about this? Is this like what? How are you thinking about the transition?
yeah, well, I mean, not that anyone will be interested in the details. Well, maybe if they're thinking about, different career trajectories. So I was able to negotiate with my university to go on basically a graded retirement. So I'll be on 75% now, and then the next year 50%. And then they say, that's it. We're not going to keep you on indefinitely from a beach in the middle of the Pacific. That's, um,
Reasonable.
yeah. But it gives me time to try to finish up some projects that I have going. And I love the teaching. I'm going to miss the in-person teaching, but that's actually what I'm working on this summer actually is primarily just switching my in-person courses over to online
Yeah.
venues for the next couple of years.
Mhm. And once the projects you've got going on now are over, are you thinking of like a clean break? Or are you going to stay involved? Or how? I'm always curious how people think about this transition.
Yeah, well, I think part of it's going to be, of course, your own intrinsic motivations, but I think part of it's the nature of the positions. And, most of my colleagues, like yourself, are involved in graduate programs. They have graduate students. There's um, I was one of the few, and I'm one of the very few now that Michael Gertman was another like myself that was always in a position of just working with undergraduates. There's a long history to how that happened. I arrived at Idaho and they immediately closed down the clinical program. The
Yeah.
semester I arrived,
Uh,
due to state politics and only that's it had nothing to do with my arrival, where they just threw up their hands. Um, so I've pretty much spent my career working with undergraduates. I mean, I don't have like these ongoing relationships. I think it makes it much easier to just make a clean break.
mhm,
Um, but I guess I'll just see. I have all these other fantasies of things that I would do that might be intellectually stimulating that wouldn't involve going through, submission processes. And so for some of the less gratifying elements of being a researcher, but I think I'm focused on just the next 2 years and trying to feel like I'm not leaving the projects that are currently incomplete forever. I think that'll be my main, and then I'll take it from there.
uh. I've got a lot of friends who are retiring, and I'm sort of obsessed with asking about this transition, like how people think about it. And it's like you get the same answer from everybody, but the details are always different. The same answer is always, I'm going to keep doing the parts of my job that I liked and stop doing the parts of my job that I didn't like. But the which parts those are like totally different across people. So it sounds like you want to keep a hand in your work. I mean, you've been really productive, given that you don't have PhD students who are like churning stuff out, and have been doing really cool stuff for a long time, and have continued to do recently. So one imagines that you could do that. I mean, you publish single author papers fairly regularly, so it seems like you could, if you wanted to, like keep churning that stuff out, or stop or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of the single author papers, is in part because of the nature of my position and the
Yeah.
nature of the the undergraduates that often just come in so briefly they can't end up really being sufficiently involved to be authors on. Um, and so I think I've become pretty good at that. And I've also, to be honest, as much as I love collaborating, I also really enjoy having these independent projects. So I can drop it for some number of months and then I can pick it up again. And there's nobody else that I feel like I'm letting down as a result of working at some idiosyncratic pace. Um, yeah, so I can imagine continuing to do that, when I get a, so what'll happen is I tend to just get obsessed with something. And then I forget about all the other things I'm working on and work on something for some period of time. So that could easily continue to happen after my official,
Yeah.
retirement.
Good sense of part. Yeah, I mean, well, part of it might be guilt avoidance and resources, but it does seem like there's a kind of freedom to this thing that you're describing. I mean, do you feel that way that like because you do single authored stuff, you don't there's a sort of more unique, maybe creative aspect to some of your work relative to stuff that's more group oriented or I sort of feel that about your work, that you do stuff that is when you write a paper, it's hard for me to anticipate what it's going to be about, but it's always cool.
Oh, well, that's very kind to say. Um, I think, yeah, I think autonomy, which is what I mean, we all have autonomy, in academia relative to obviously working in industry. Um, But the nature of what happened with my position, when they canceled the grad program, they just said, well, gosh, do whatever you want in your relatively small research component of your position description. It's been really wonderful in terms of maintaining my intrinsic motivation. That has never lagged once, over these many decades now. Um, on the other hand, um, building a programmatic, I think probably the most programmatic area has been the interpersonal circumplex component, which is, what you're most familiar with, other Citarians would be most familiar with. But, I tried my hand on so many different things, but they've had less impact, I think, because it just takes time to
Mhm.
really typically to have an impact, to have people recognize your work, pay attention to it in a particular domain. So the autonomy, I think, is a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is social. Like you get involved in social and then you become, oh, yeah, the guy that does this. And then people
Mhm.
cite that without reading papers. So there is a kind of artifact to this, like what gets legs to a certain degree, kind of a Matthew effect thing that happens once you're a person who's known for doing something. So I've had
Right.
projects like that too that I think were cool, but they were like one off things. Like I thought this would be fun to do or interesting. And it doesn't really get cited or whatever, but I still think it was worth doing. So I see what you
Mhm.
mean with that autonomy. Yeah. But you also have done, I mean, you started as a clinical faculty intending, it sounds like, to train clinical or supervise clinical students. And that didn't happen, but you've continued to have a clinical career. Isn't that right?
Well, of sorts. So I've maintained my license for all these years, and there were long periods where it was just I wasn't using it really. Um, and uh, the periods of time when I have used it, because the university really there was a 10-year period where we had a clinic that was primarily doing assessment of neurodevelopmental disorders. So I should clarify that there's a very good clinical program at Washington State University, which is just 7 miles away
Mhm.
from the University of Idaho. We're each on the border of our respective states, Washington and
Mhm.
Idaho. And their clinical students, when they were just needing assessment supervision, would come over to our clinic and I would supervise the assessment processes. So oddly enough, I became somewhat specialized in assessing childhood neurodevelopmental disorders, which is nothing what I was originally trained in.
Oh,
And so that's my clinical license was primarily used there.
I see. Uh-huh. Yeah, and your research doesn't, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know that you have clinical interest based on your research profile either. It's mostly social personality kind of group-based stuff.
Yeah, so I did when I was initially when they shut the clinical program down, I tried to get clinical samples. Went to the VAs in Spokane, and it just ended up for pragmatic reasons.
It's hard.
Um, do work on undergraduates and then eventually, online samples. And so that kind of pushed me more in the direction of doing the social personality work that I,
One thing, like when I think about you, one thing I think about is like a person who asks good questions at sitar, or I think we've only probably ever been to sitar together in terms of conferences. Maybe that's not true. Probably it's true. And you know who else was really good at asking questions was Len Horowitz.
the best. She was, yes.
It would always be like, there'd be a talk. And he would often let other people sort of ask a few questions first, and then it was kind of like the comedian that you don't want to follow in a way, like then Len asked the question, you're like, oh right, no shit, like that's probably the thing we need to be thinking about now. But you're like that too. But that was an attempt at an awkward attempt at a segue to talk about Len. So you worked with him. He was your doctoral advisor. That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He was my, um, yeah. So he, I, it, he would be an example of consistency of personality. So
Okay.
there's some people who might show different sides of themselves in different contexts. But I got to know Len in all these different contexts, and he was pretty darn consistent. Because he would occasionally, invite us to his home. Of course, seeing him at the office day after day, in graduate school, then at these conferences, the same kind of gentle demeanor. But then he would say something that would just be so incisive. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like working with him day to day? I know it was a long time ago.
Well, initially, okay, so um, was, he brought in strays. And I was a stray.
You were
And the
straight.
only other really active graduate student at the time working with him was Kim Bartholomew, who was
Yeah.
also sort of a stray. She was coming in from developmental. I started out actually in cognitive. That was my initial area. And eh, there was, there was a whole host of things going on in the department. Everyone's trajectory is unique, and a lot of it has to do with contingencies and
Totally.
serendipity. So my advisor had just been placed into the dean of the college
Uh,
position there. And I met with him twice my first year. And so I kind of talk about doing solo projects. I pretty much, you have to do a project. That's how
I
Stanford is
see.
set up. Your first year, you need to take a project from start to finish. So write it up. And I pretty much learned how to do it on my own because he was utterly preoccupied. Right? Other cognitive faculty were on sabbatical or otherwise, inundated with students. So I was kind of just out there doing my thing. But the one of the quarters of my first year, because you just have to take various courses, I took Len's abnormal course. And we hit it off. He kind of he liked, what I was saying. And so then sometime in the middle of my second year, he goes, this guy clearly has no supervision and he's kind of floundering. And he just stopped me in the hall. He literally just, I was out in the hall and he goes, hey, there's this project that we're working on. He had a postdoc that actually had great psychoanalytic training, didn't understand research at all. They were trying to do a project. I think Len was getting frustrated and said, can you kind of take over the day-to-day management of this project? And that's how I got let in. I I got that project done to completion, and it was all behavioral. At that point, Len was really into like, we got to be studying real behavior. We got to be videotaping and we got to be microanalyzing moment by moment what's going on. So I got the lab all set up with the video equipment, and we had this cool talk table as kind of where this is old school, where we wanted to measure the satisfaction each moment, each turn after each statement in the interaction. So it was literally at the end of the table, there were these 5 buttons on each side. And depending on whether you were not at all satisfied to very satisfied, you'd push the first, second, third, or fourth button, click, click, click. And there's a little electrical relay that go across the room, and we, go to a microcomputer. You have to understand this is like, 1985, 86. Yeah. And we'd record satisfaction moment by moment, and then we'd match it up with the statements being made. Um, and this is kind of cool.
It's
The
a sweet study, yeah.
project, yeah. So the project that he was doing with this postdoc didn't work. But then I said, hey, you know, I know how to use all the equipment now, and I got this idea, and so that's how it all, eventually after a little over 2 years, he goes, I guess you're kind of my student now, and I'm your advisor.
Okay. Well, isn't there kind of a weird parallel because Len also start off in cognitive and then kind of become social personality and then kind of like dabble in clinical? So similar to
Yes.
you in a way.
Yes, very much so. So he actually, yeah, he had spent, really his first 10 years doing psycholinguistics. And my first year project that I had done was on pronouns. I was just fascinated by pronouns, and they're just um, when you stop and think about them in a conversation. When I just said them, like what was I referring to? There's really no inherent semantic content to a pronoun. If the word it comes up in the middle of some conversation, what is it referring to? And I
Yeah.
was just fascinated by how it really was, in a sense, interpersonal, because what you have to have done is built up some mutual understanding,
Uh-huh.
some shared world model that the pronoun can be referencing. Um, and I think so. We understood, we both were coming from this kind of psycholinguistic background, then developed clinical interests. So, yes, I think that also made it a natural fit for me.
Uh-huh. And day to day, it sounds like your experience at Stanford was that the advisors were hands off. Was
Oh,
Len also that way, or is that was that just the
uh,
vibe there, or was that?
no, initially it was like, so he said, fine, you do this project. And I had other ideas, which he would shake his head and he was right. Because boy, I could spend the rest, if you want me to go on a gripe. I was kind of, well, I'll say that the two related things. The Stanford Psychology Department, I would say at the time, for all of its strengths, was kind of ground zero for what became the replication crisis. Um, do experimental research with very small n and keep tweaking it until you find a result, and then never tell anyone that you tried 20, 30 different, you
Yeah.
know, combinations of, where you'd have 15 people per condition. That was the model there. And secondly, so my initial projects in cognitive when I was doing, for example, the work with pronouns was with priming and reaction time. Um, and so I saw all this cool priming research that started to really emerge in the mid 1980s. And I said, I'm going to combine that with my new interests in psychodynamics, and I'm going to prime previous relationships, which I called these internalized or imaginary audiences, and show effects on cognition of having different people from your past that I will activate, a critical person, a nurturing person, and show that your pattern of thinking. Because I still believe, I mean, at least the way I think, there's always implicitly an audience that I am communicating to. And so, who's the implicit audience when I'm thinking about things? Um, and the thing is, I wasted 15 years of my career on and off, trying to get these priming results. And I won't give the name, but I eventually start to get the feeling like there's nothing, it's too weak, and the cells are too small. I kept wondering, how did anyone get this? Well, they weren't. And it was actually at a sitar, I won't name the name. There was somebody whose work had really influenced me initially, who, over a beer, kind of admitted that they p-hacked their way into getting these famous priming results. They, it's like, yeah. So yes, but that always, by the way, of like Len goes, I don't think this is a really good direction. I said, oh, this is a really cool direction. Just imagine if I was able to prime previous relationships
Yeah.
and show real-time effects on thinking patterns. But yeah, he was right. The behavioral work is what turned out. That study I next did with our talk table, which was looking at interactions between people of different levels of dysphoria. That one worked. So he was right. His intuition of like stick with the behavioral stuff, do these micro analyses of turn-by-turn interactions. I should have listened to him, but
I
he
mean, it
gave
is
me
a cool
enough.
idea.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
a psychologically compelling idea of like, well, who's on your mind right now as you're acting, and does that affect the way that you think about things? Um, But I mean, the trouble with that stuff, as you well know, is that like as a student, you're led to believe this is how science is done. And so when you fail to get the right result, you just feel like, well, maybe you're dumb or you did it wrong or you're not going to experience. I mean, I'm sure like you know many people. I know so many people because I was doing my PhD like just before the replication crisis. So I know a handful of people who had that kind of identity of like, well, I must just not be good at experiments. One of my best friends did terror management studies, his whole PhD, and
Mhm.
he couldn't get the effect. And his advisor was like, well, you must not be good at this. And so he got out of academia. And it's like, I mean, smart guy, ambitious, hardworking, and unlucky. Meanwhile, I was correlating questionnaires with each other and I got a job.
Yeah, so actually I had the same so I initially the reason why okay, so I had a really hard time getting my independent research to be publishable, because we weren't going to publish the null results. Um, and well, I'll say this to my credit, that I didn't p-hack. I really wanted to find something robust. And I actually had one of my advisors, I'll name names, David Rosenhan, if anyone remembers him, um, who actually said, Ken, the successful students learn how to massage their data. And that phrase, there's just something about the way he said it. And I just, in my gut, I knew that
It's
was
wrong.
wrong. I wasn't going to, but not to my credit, in retrospect, looking back, how was I thinking 20 and, an N of 20 per cell was going to do it? It seems so obvious now that there just wasn't sufficient power. And somehow it didn't get through my skull. So I decided I wasn't good at it and decided I was going to leave academia and become a clinician. So I actually was out of academia for 5 years, and I did various part-time adjunct on the side while I was trying to start a private practice. But along the way, Len hooked me up. I was also to help pay the bills. I was a research associate over at the Stanford Psychiatry Department. In part when I was getting my postdoc hours, clinical hours there. And that's when I started correlating questionnaires. They had a whole bunch of intake batteries, and they said, okay, do something with this lock, and, which included the IIP, which of course I had been aware of all along. I was aware of, even before it turned into the Circumplex IEP, we had played around with it, Len and I. Um, and suddenly everything was falling into place. You know, it's like, okay, it's not that I'm bad at this, but now I have like an N of 300. Um, I have meaningful outcome measures, um, and I said, okay, that actually got me re-engaged with research.
One of my favorite papers of yours is with Pam, and it starts out something like, I went to graduate school and these two guys, Len Horowitz and Albert Bandura, are like next to each other. And they seem to be talking about something pretty similar, but they don't seem to be talking to each other about it. So I guess I'm gonna have to deal with this.
Well, I'm impressed that I never know if anyone really reads the
It
things I write.
was a great setup.
Yeah, yeah, they had their offices were right next door. So of course I bumped into Al, Bindor for many ways. I mean, my girlfriend at the time, for a couple of years in grad school, she had a severe snake phobia. And when Al wanted to create a set of videos showing the process of using his social cognitive approach to deal with phobias, she was the subject.
Jesus.
We
Oh, jeez.
videotaped. And so, we said that I'd have to lead her to the room to be exposed
Ay,
to the
ay, ay.
snake. Um, and so, yeah, and I took a whole course from him on self-efficacy, which, so when I got my clinical training, I ended up actually specializing in cognitive behavioral. And so it was like these two influences that my academic training with Len was really more psychodynamic, but my clinical training was more cognitive behavioral. And yeah, so that's where the especially obviously the interest in developing a measure of self-efficacy, because it
Mhm.
just, when I was going through my clinical training, it really was, I don't know if others have had this experience, but where these inventories that the people in Sitar have been interested in, the values and self-efficacy, um, I found that we were using when I was doing especially my postdoc hours, we were using interpersonal problems. But, and it was really, I was convinced this is a great way to communicate with patients because they understood the circle. I could give them feedback and they got it in a way that MMPI was like, very intuitive, the circle. But in terms of the levers, at least the way I was trained, the levers are, you know, increased self-efficacy. And it was the initial thing with the values was more coming from rational motive therapy. Is like if you put too much intensity on a certain value, you know, you're gonna like, I have to have this. I have to have this. You know, what Albert Ellis called masturbation, must, you know, I have to be in control. I can't let myself be humiliated. They can't get angry with me.
Right, right, right,
And
right.
it's like recognize, okay, these are important values, but we need to dial these down. We need to
Right.
increase the efficacy and dial down the importance so that you can have a broader range of goals that you can seek in the interaction. So that was the initial motive was, with respect to developing those inventories was like those, at least the way I think about things, those were the levers.
That's so interesting. I mean, it also sounds really Rogerian the way that you're talking about. But I mean, so I find the values elevation parameter, so like the total score of the CSIV, so interesting because it's quite unique in terms of its correlation, at least in the data I've collected with psychopathology. It really has to do with like kind of rigidity, obsessionality. There is something like what you're saying. I mean, it's not like one of these distress internalizing measures like the IIP elevation score, which is like correlates with every kind of psychopathology under the sun. It's quite specific, but it has to do with this thing that you're talking about of like, I need the world to be a certain way. And if it's
Yeah.
not, then it's like a problem for me. And
Yeah.
it's not really obvious. I mean, the way that you're talking about it now, I guess maybe it was obvious to you before you started, but it's not obvious to me why like having more or less values would be good or bad in general, right? But it does turn out, at least again in the data I've collected, and and in the way that you just formulated it, like it's better if you don't like want too much too badly. It's
Yeah.
just like
So
chill out a little bit.
yeah, exactly. And maybe I've never been as clear about that because it's harder to study a curvilinear pattern. It's like there would really be a sweet spot. I mean, it's like it's not
Right.
saying
Yeah.
we all are Buddhas that are completely like
Right.
non-attached to the outcomes of our interactions, but not be so attached to a
Right.
particular type of outcome.
Yeah, and
Um,
on average, it's worse to be too attached, at least again, in the results I've seen, than to be, I guess you could be nihilist or something like that. And that's worse for other people maybe than it is for you. Well, you've mentioned a few times, like, you've mentioned the autonomy piece and that you get obsessed with stuff. And you've done so many interesting things. Like, how does this happen for you? Like, is it like you're reading stuff and you're like, oh, nobody's done this before? Does it like an idea come or like, or is it a conscious, deliberate process? Like, what makes you interested in stuff?
ah, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I'll tell you what the conscious. I don't know about the initial interests. It's hard to say because since there hasn't been a through line, and I can't really find, what that would be. But the conscious piece is since I don't really have to do it, I really never did. It's like have to do the research, the nature of my position. You could do just the most minimal and it's okay. So it was always intrinsically motivated. So then it was a matter of not just am I interested, but is this something that that nobody else would do. Like I've never been
Uh-huh.
worried about being scooped. It's like, fine, scoop me. I'll never get the way Idaho works, there was no merit raises, and there wasn't any extrinsic reward to, so it was all a matter of, um, is this something that I think if I don't do it, maybe no one else will do it? Or at least do it this way. So that would be
Uh-huh.
where the conscious piece was like, is it worth me spending, months on this or not? It would
Uh-huh.
come in as a,
So there is a kind of external piece, a sort of like you take the lay of the land and find a kind of gap that it like seems like this is a thing that people aren't really doing.
yeah, that's right. It certainly was like the other major area that I worked on for years that maybe the people in Sitar wouldn't be aware of was on social comparison. Um, Which really, yeah. So, and I just saw that there was a perspective on social comparison that seemed so bloody obvious to me, and that was just absent in the social comparison literature, which was the communion, that it was all about comparing status. It was all upward and downward. And so that was and this really came out of that initial my first publication, the one I did with Len, that came out of doing these interactions with people differing levels of dysphoria. And the basic idea there was I had seen that when I took the graduate social psych course, there was like this conflict. They talked about social comparison, but they also talked about like one of the most robust findings in all of social psychology is similarity leads to liking. Similarity leads to comfort. And that shows up in all sorts of ways. Um, and yet they were saying when people are interacting, all they're doing is comparing status and who's better or worse. And it seemed like, well, no, people really like the connection. They like that sense of I'm not alone. And so whenever we're comparing ourselves to each other, that's probably an important motivation as well. Now, we may also be noticing status, but at least for me, it's like I want to know, are we on the same page? Do you like the same foods? Do you like the same music? Do you approach, your academics like in the same way? Um, that's so much more salient. So that led to really the other major line of research I had for much of my career, which was on showing that really agency and communion are core to what people are doing when they're engaging in social comparison.
Right. Yeah, right. It's interesting. I mean, for some reason, I was just free associating to like the collaborations that I've had and the ones that I like the best are typically like people I really like. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid and I played a lot of basketball. And why do you play basketball? I mean, you play to win, but also because it's a small enough sport that there's only four other people and you have to work together
Mm,
and there's specialized roles, right? So, and it's dynamic. So, like in this particular play, your role should be this, like you set a pick, or you get the rebound, or you do whatever, and you kind of have to work together in this dynamic way. And I think that, I mean, I can't really play basketball anymore, but I think of my work that way too. Of like, I like to work with people that I really like being around, and it's not so much one up or one down. It's not so much like, are you better than me? It's like, are you better at this thing than me? Or can you be better at this thing or take responsibility for this thing on this project so that I can do something else? And you
mm,
just sort of settle into this configuration when it works. It's really great. Like my most longtime collaborators, people like Aiden and Aaron and Vidka, my partner, and others, it's really been like that, where it's just so natural after you've done enough projects together. Like, okay, we don't have to talk about it. I know you're going to set the pick. I'm going to come around. I'm going to shoot the shot or whatever, but with research. And for some reason, the way you were just talking about this reminded me of that, of like the liking piece is the glue that holds it together.
oh, yes. No, that's so true. It's that's been studied to some extent in relationships. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of it being studied as much in work teams. That makes perfect sense. Where um, i- in order to maintain the glue among adults, equals, there has to be some sharing of status. It's like you're better at this, I'm better at this. So everyone's getting the agentic needs met. Um, um, and it doesn't have to be a conflict because we each have
Totally.
different areas of relative strength. Yeah, so
And the power thing, the status, I mean, also like either one of us could do this, but why don't you do it and I'll do the other thing,
mm,
right? I mean,
mm,
music works like that too. Like, well, you take the lead now and I'll take it later or whatever. Like, um, it's in my experience, at least as I'm thinking about it now, it's really only when the communion part starts to fade that all of these, like, are you really doing your part? Am I better than you? Are you better than me? That stuff isn't really salient if the team's working together or if the band's working together or whatever. Um,
yeah, yeah, good point. Yeah.
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 So I gave you a homework assignment, I think, which is to solve an interpersonal problem, which is there's a teenager in your household who's ignoring rules, reacting defensively whenever limits are set, starting to argue with you. It's becoming annoying. I have a teenager in my house, so this is like a very salient example for me. It's getting emotionally intense. You have active fantasies about like kicking them out or kicking them. They hate you. What do you do? How do you get out of this bind? I have a circle if you want me to share my screen. That
Oh,
would be
sure.
helpful. Do you want this? You probably want the single surface circle, or I also have like the SASB, or I have the interpersonal situation model with more circles in it.
Well, we can do the single circle because that's, my most familiar.
Let's do that. Let's do that one. Yeah. How do you think about this?
Well, I'll tell you, so my mischievous response when I first, so you can find out something about my mischievous personality was, oh, this is what's happening right now. Chris is the parent. He's given me a homework assignment. So
Exactly what
if
I'm
I
thinking
get on the
of.
Zoom call and I say, what homework assignment? I must have missed that. I didn't prepare for your homework assignment.
I'm gonna go
And then
preserve.
we'd see what Chris would do if I was that kind of defensive, passive aggressive teen. So, but I did read your homework assignment. And yeah, so um, in the interpersonal circle, what appears to be happening is that the parent clearly and presumably the kid would like to be over on the affiliative side of this circle, but because at some point, and it's probably, in the teens, because as you go 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, they're fine with you as a parent exerting that control. But at some point, that control is going to start to rankle in some way. Now, this is, the typical pattern. We're not talking about, if it's oppositional defiant child and so forth. Remember, I spent years diagnosing neurodevelopmental disorders, and we have to do differential with, what's ADHD, what's ODD. Anyway, so we're assuming, none of those patterns have occurred before. So it's emerging now in the teenage years. And so the teen at least is experiencing that control as a negative thing. So they're perceiving more, I guess, the parent being this uh, BC, controlling but without understanding me, controlling without showing the flexibility that I deserve. And so there, um, maybe initially, there might be that sort of passive aggressive response where they're down in the, like, well, I'm just going to withdraw into my room. I'm not going to talk to you. They're down in the lower left. Um, but they're thinking, I want to defy this. So we're going to have a power conflict. The way to push you, the teen wants to push you back out of that role. Say, I'm not going to accept that. I do not accept your ability to just tell me what to do, at least in this context. And so then they get in this power struggle, and the parent feels like, okay, I need to like up the pressure in some way. And yeah, that would be the bad cycle. Um, in, in terms of like how you get over to the right-hand side, um, you know, the I mean, clearly the devil's in the details here. In terms of whether this is an immediate safety issue, it sounds like not. It sounds like it's been emerging over time. It's not, that the kid is reeling in at 1 a.m., clearly wasted. You don't know who they've been hanging out with. And if it's kind of a more typical, like you went an hour past your curfew without telling me. I told you not to use, your screen, and stay up late at night. Clearly, you stayed up till midnight scrolling, TikTok or whatever. You know, then you have a little more time. It's not an emergency, and so at least for, so here's I have grown children. So the youngest is 29. But I went through the teen years, and I think we each have our styles. And I naturally am more prone to be a Carl Rogers. And so the first thing is just understand um, what's going on, because it's hard to come up with a win-win solution if I don't really understand what's bugging them. Beyond just they want more agency, and that's great. You want to get there, right? So it probably won't be a good long-term solution unless they get more agency. But how to do it, so it's, you know, so yeah, so creating that rapport, creating just conversation, not when it's all heated. But with my kids, we always set the rule that everyone had to sit down for dinner. There was no screens, there was no distractions. Um, and ideally, if perhaps just one-on-one, and just just talk about stuff. And if this comes up, great. But just make sure that you're enjoying your time together as mutual understanding outside of whatever the conflictual issue is. And then understand, like, okay, here's what it is. It's like, it's really, I'm thinking back to my teens yesterday. It's so humiliating if I'm with my friends and I have to either cut out or, well, at the time it was landlines, I have to call my parents. Like, when am I a baby? It's like, so I can't, those are the times I messed up is I just wouldn't embarrass myself, you know? So like, finally, like, okay, if that's really what's going on, we can figure out a solution. It's always we, like you and me, you're growing up and eventually you're gonna be a fully independent teen, as you move into your later teens. Okay, let's figure this out. Would a like a 5 character text be enough? See you at 10:30 instead of 10 or something. Like what would solve it? Like you get more autonomy, but you're also showing me responsibility. So I'm not like, worrying. And um, yeah, I mean that's kind of the rough direction I'd be going.
Be warmer. So what?
Certainly
So,
start, yeah.
so what you're saying is I should
And
kick him out of the house and hope that by the time he's 30, it's better. That's what I'm hearing you say.
definitely
Yeah,
that
kick him out.
thank you for I was rambling on
Good
and you just
summary.
kind of summarized it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it can be hard. I mean, there is all this stuff about like, that like the intuitive thing is to think, well, like, I mean, parents are there to shape kids' behavior. And so it's like the causal direction on behavior is like the parents can cause a kid to be a certain way, to be warm or cold. But there's pretty good evidence that it's completely bidirectional, that kids influence parents' behavior as much as parents influence kids' behavior. And it does get hard for many parents, I think, to get into this cycle of like, I'm trying to be warm. I'm trying to invite conversation at the dinner table. I'm trying to do this, but they're so grumpy, so disinterested, and they're doing stupid stuff all the time. And it drives me crazy. And then you realize, oh, for the last week, all I've done has been critical or whatever. And you get into this kind of trap and you realize it's really not just the kid. Now it's like you have some responsibility to like overcome the pull.
Right. And keeping the like a long-term perspective is it eventually you will have no or very little power. I mean, um I think that parenting style inventory that came out that used the Circumplex, I thought was just great. It's like we all certainly I knew this intuitively, but just mapping the authoritative reciprocal onto the Circumplex, and that's the upper right. Um, but what always I don't know if this is it probably has been. I'm not a developmentalist, probably been talked about. But the trajectory is it's got to go increasingly less authoritative and more reciprocal. And then eventually you're equals, as your kids become adults. So there has to be some gradation so you didn't specify when you just said teens. So that could be 13 to 19, right?
Sure, sure.
And at
Yeah,
19, they might very well be out of the house, right? So,
yeah.
that's like slowly to be titrating the authority, more back and forth, more of what you're talking about, like is a good collaboration where, um, that's what I definitely found with my kids is, um, there are some things better. Like, so when we're coming up with a solution, I don't understand how these apps work. You do. You help us come up with a solution here. Um, so there's things you're better at that you can parent me about as we're trying to work through this. And
There is that thing that happens in the early teens where you realize, like, I'm not really showing my kid how to live life anymore. Now I'm just kind of like hoping they do their best and I'm kind of around
mm,
if they need something. I'm kind of like, when things go wrong, I'm here.
right.
Uh, and it is a kind of difficult transition, I think, for many people. But that's much earlier than the like, okay, it's time to get out of my house transition for both of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I still find that there's, you know, I mean, I don't think I've ever overcome the impulse of like, I am older and I do have some experience. I would
Yeah.
really like to weigh in here and say you may regret this, but I just have to.
The other thing I find that helps is to observe other kids the same age as yours or talk to parents of other kids the same
Mm,
age. And then you're like, oh, right. This is not my kid. This is like a developmental. Like I was talking to my neighbor the other day. My kid, one of my kids is 19. I've got kids before the teenage years too, but one of them is 19. And um, she was like, "Yeah, I've got a 19-year-old at my house." It's like sometimes on Sunday at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I knock on the door and she comes out like a zombie, wearing the same clothes she had Friday night, stinking, and she's been horizontal this entire time. You're like, so if I don't tell you to come out of the room, you just like 48 hours in your bedroom, laying in bed in the dark, watching whatever videos. And I was like, oh, yeah, so this is not, there's nothing wrong with my kid. This is like what kids will do if they're left to their own devices.
well, I think it gets especially awkward, right? If the kids move back home or they stay at home after the official age of adulthood, right? So in a sense, there's no more actual legal authority. They
Exactly.
can, it's not a matter of kicking them out. They could walk out at any time. You know, but you're still, if they're at home, boy, falling into the same patterns you've had for years. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Oh, I live in a place where it's too expensive for kids to move out of their parents' house until they have a real job. So this is the challenge that we happen to be dealing with at the moment. But yeah, anyway. So, well, maybe it's time to pack up. We've got a World Cup game coming. Do you care about soccer? Are you interested at all in the World Cup?
Will this be heretical if I say no, I don't
It's up
care
to
at
you
all?
now. No, 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 no. It doesn't. I didn't care until I married a European, and now, the trouble is like I'm still into North American sports, but they all happen in the middle of the night, so I never watch games anymore. And I've got this very bizarre habit of like listening to podcasts about sports. So it's like, how do you engage in sports? The most direct way is to play them. Well, I don't really do that anymore. The second most direct way is to watch them. I don't do that anymore. So now I listen to podcasts by people who have watched other people play. And this is how I think there's also something about like maintaining a connection to my culture or something like that. Um, but I'm sort of but so I mean, right now the World Cup is in North America, but generally speaking, I can watch soccer as it's happening, which is at least one step closer to the real thing.
Well, I certainly know. I grew up around some relatives who were obsessed with sports, but it wasn't the watching. It was the arguing about, it was comparing statistics, it was who remembered different statistics. So I assume the podcast is serving to some extent that function, where it seemed like it was almost peripheral, like, oh yeah, at that point, like there's a black and white TV with a game on, but it was all about
Right,
um,
right.
the larger context. Uh,
It's true. I think it's a lot like personality assessment. Like, there's a profile of data, and you're sort of like, oh, this person's got high scores over there, and the other person's got high scores over there. And
yeah, that I could probably get into.
yeah.
Um, Well, I don't want to keep you from your game, but I am curious. Like, so you've done now multiple of these. Uh, I don't know what to call them. There's sort of conversations. They're sort of
Friendly
interviews.
chats.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about how they're going?
It's great. Well, part of it, honestly, so I had multiple motivations when I thought about why I would do this. One of them was I thought to myself, like, if I was a graduate student and I had had a chance to see videos of like Len Horowitz talking to Lorna Smith Benjamin or Timothy Leary talking to Bob Carson or whatever, like, how amazing would that have been, right? Not that I'm putting myself in those people's shoes, but I just think it's kind of cool to have a historical record of people like chatting. And then I also thought about it like part of it is the chat. It's not what you write in paper. I mean, what we write in papers is also really important, but I think a lot of my experience of this job of doing like personality and interpersonal research is actually these kinds of things where you're just talking about like, well, what were you thinking about with that study? Or like, what's going to happen next? Or how do you think about this thing? Or what will you take on that paper or whatever? And that's the stuff that happened in between the talks with coffee or afterwards at dinner or over a beer or whatever. So this is the most fun part of the job for me, but I think also it's where a lot of the action happens that then gets polished and ends up in papers. Maybe less for you because you're kind of like this iconoclast, autonomous, I'm off on my own filling gaps. But I think for all of us though, right, that's like a really essential part that is not as transparent unless you're going to conferences or whatever. Um, And so and then the third thing I think is that I just miss hanging out with people because since COVID and since moving to Europe, sitar used to be like one of my favorite things to do all year long. And there's still a sitar, but it's less regularly attended, and people like you are probably less likely to come in the future. And we've lost some people like Lorna and Len, et cetera. So part of it is just to like have an excuse to hang out with people, catch up. I haven't seen you for a long time, right? So it's
Yeah,
nice to catch up.
yeah.
And
Well, likewise, and I appreciate you doing. I think that for me was always the best part of Sitar. I mean, the talks are great, but what was unique was the opportunities for intimate conversations. And,
yeah, so you asked how's it going, and that is how it's going. It's been really great. I mean, I've done 5 or 6 of them, and it's been really fun hanging out. And it's not exactly like hanging out at the bar after Sitar or whatever, but it's close. By the way, speaking of the bar after Sitar, Vika asked me who I was talking to tonight, and I told her, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I remember dancing with him in San Francisco at this weird club. You remember when we when we like I think we grabbed you and Pam by the collars and we're like, we're going into this club, and you're like, it's like a $30 cover. It's like, don't worry about it. Let's dance."
yeah,
So,
so obviously vaguely, so who knows what else I took while I was dancing at the club in San Francisco.
or yeah, maybe something got put in your drink. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I experienced ego dissolution because, but yeah, now I have a terrible episodic memory. So I'll just trust you that I didn't do anything
That
too embarrassing.
happens. No, no, you didn't do. I don't recall you doing anything embarrassing, but that definitely happened. Um, okay, Ken. Well, it was great hanging out, and thanks a lot for doing this. Getting up early in the morning. I hope that your move continues to go well, and the transition goes well, et cetera, and that our paths cross again soon.
Yes, likewise, and enjoy the World Cup finales.
I can take it easy.